Welcome to the Diversity Connector podcast, where we explore the rich tapestry of human experiences. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country on which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging, and together as we dive into conversations that bridge cultures, challenge stereotypes, and celebrate the unique perspectives each of us brings to the table. Each episode is a journey through stories and insights from a kaleidoscope of voices, each sharing their colorful narrative. Whether you're at home, on the go, or just anywhere in between, you're now part of a community that values understanding, inclusivity, and the beauty of diversity. So plug in your headphones, get comfortable, and let's connect through the power of our shared stories. Welcome, and thank you for joining us on the Diversity Connector podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Diversity Connector. This is Gertrude Mache here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am graced with the presence of yet another fascinating young woman. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our tribe. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, how old you are, and share your story with us today.
Hi everyone, thank you so much, Auntie Gertrude. My name is Effie Nkrumah. I'm 36 years old. I'm based currently in Naarm, otherwise known as Melbourne, but I'm a child from Gadigal, Darrick Land to be specific, which is known as Blacktown in Western Sydney. My family moved to Australia, in the 80s, I'm going to say, 88. So my family is Ghanaian. I'm a proud Ghanaian woman, Fanti to be specific, which is a language group in the Akan nation, tribe, ethnic group, whichever word you wish to use for it. And my dad's family ended up moving to Zimbabwe in the 80s for my grandfather's work. He was a journalist and had been sent as a diplomat from Ghana to help with the Zimbabwean independence movement. Through that, my family ended up dispersing into diaspora, as is common for most families from the African continent in general, but especially, I guess, in those very early pre-colonial post-colonial times. So most of my family went to the United States and the UK, which is quite common for people from Ghana. My parents said, no, God has different plans from us, prayed about it, and they ended up moving to Sydney in New South Wales, where my dad was studying at UNSW. From there, we moved gradually through Sydney, right from Pagewood, where I started kindergarten and year one. From there, we moved to the inner west, Marrickville, where I did my years 2 and 3 education at Marrickville West Public School, which was amazing for me when I look back now because it was so diverse, so diverse. All migrant kids, first generation, from everywhere, Greece, Turkey, Lebanon. We had a lot of people from Bangladesh, from Philippines, and of course me from Ghana and a couple of others. From there, in '96, my family moved to Blacktown, and that's where I guess my sense of identity and questions I was asking really started to form through my time there, because I was much older. I could make sense of a bit more of what was going on around me. So I did from the 4th grade all the way through to year 12, where I graduated at Tyndale Christian School out in Blacktown, which was a very specific experience and one that I'm grateful for in many ways, and one that I'm like, when I did get into a selective school for years 11 and 12, should I have taken that? I don't know. We'll never know. So that's, I guess, my background, my early years. Through all that time, my parents encouraged us to read a lot. I'm a big reader. My taste in books were never my parents' choice for me. I chose things like the Babysitter's Club and things that on the outside looked a bit happy-go-lucky, a bit bland. But what I found through reading books like that or series like that is they were so definitely diverse that I was introduced to different cultures through each of the characters. And if any of you have ever read The Babysitter's Club, you'll know how diverse it is. There's Jessie, who's black, Kirsty, who's white. There was Mallory, who was a redhead from a really, really big family. There was Stacy, who was blonde, bombshell from New York City, Claudia, who was half Japanese, and the story goes on and on. So I learned a lot about, of course, American history, but it helped me to start thinking about how I saw the world and the kind of diversity that I was living in every day. So I graduated year 12 from Tyndale, did my HSC. And at the time, I was very, very clear about what I was interested in, which was the arts. For me, it was going to be either the arts or hospitality. And I was constantly told, you need a backup. So in my case, I kind of had to fight hard and say, you know, I really want to go into the arts. I did try hospitality, I will be fair. I did from 5-star kitchens to workers' club kitchens for all my work experience through years 11 and 12, and found that the kind of joy that I get from cooking comes from how I've been taught at home, from making food that people love. And I really wasn't ready to turn that into a technical and very hierarchical system in commercial kitchens. So I went back to my parents and I said, I really need to study the arts. I need to do performance. I need to train because I want to be an actress. Now, in the early 2000s, that just really wasn't realistic for a dark-skinned West African short woman who really had the kind of body shape that still now is not really catered for. But I'll come back to that in a bit. I did it anyway. And the key to that was through a friend of my mum, whose son, Jesse Cox, who there is an audio, currently an audio and sound fellowship named after him in his honor. He had studied all art subjects for his HSC and gotten a 91 UAI, which I think now they call ATAR. And so I went to my mum said, okay, well, I've seen how it can work. You know, we've come from a society where it's about the STEM subjects and you're coming in with the A that's in STEAM. Go ahead and make us proud. I did, and I got into what was called Theatre and Nepean, which at that time was Western Sydney's response to NIDA, the National Institute of Dramatic Arts, over in the city. However, it had been taken into what is now Western Sydney University at the time, University of Western Sydney, UWS, now WSU, and it had been taken in. Now, what happened was we had some of the most amazing training facilities in the world and the country, some of the best practitioners from contemporary dance right through to theatre making and acting training. Unfortunately, the university felt it was more profitable for them to have medical students in rather than people training in performance, despite the fact that we were training some of Sydney's and Australia's best theatre makers, dancers, and actors. So by my second year of getting into that course, the course was cut. So we were able to graduate, but we were graduating absolutely under-resourced and with no access into our profession. For most acting schools, the point is to get to your third year where you do a showcase. Agents come in, and that's where you've got an agent that says, I want to represent you, and you start your professional career in film, theatre, television, whichever one you choose, or all three if you love that. Unfortunately, we were told to our faces pretty much that agents were not going to come from the city and the northern Sydney out to the west to see talent. If we wanted it, we had to figure it out for ourselves. And unfortunately, we were very much Western Sydney kids. We had no idea who to call, how to call them, and how to get them out to where we were. So we went from a class of 55 amazing, talented performer theatre makers, and we graduated with 13. I was one of those, and I came out really believing in my talent and my passion. That took me on a journey to the rest of my life, to where I am now, where I tried to make theatre. I directed theatre for Bankstown Youth Development Services, the first African theatre project they had there. I also got into a few professional shows, not through an agent, but through people seeing my work. Ros Horan was one of the first to do that with the Balcombe Hills African Ladies Troupe that we had a season in Sydney, and then came back a few years later to do a tour of the Opera House, Parramatta Riverside, the Opera House, Nottingham, and the South Bank Women of the World Conference. which was an amazing tour. I also got to do at Belvoir, Street Theatre, etc. However, by 2012, I was quite disenchanted, tired, and just at my wit's end. I'd been given cards of amazing agents. I'd go into their rooms and they'd say, I'm retiring or can't help you now. So I decided to leave Australia. I went to Ghana in 2012 and I was there for 10 years on and off because I got a job with a theatre company there, Ghana's leading theatre company, where I choreographed and stage managed for years. But I came to a point where I was not really satisfied because I'm a performer at heart and I was giving all I had to help other people. I'm also an empath, so I could see people who had the same passion as I did. And I focused so much on them that I lost myself in the process. I also lost credibility with a lot of my friends who would come to see these shows, not see me in them, but see my work and say, one of them sat me down one day and said, Effie, I'm tired. I see these shows every quarter. You're never in them, or you come in for one scene. I know what you've got to offer to the world, and this is not it for you. It's not enough. I was hurt. I was confused. I felt like I was living my God-ordained purpose, but I realized that I was selling myself short. So one night I prayed furiously and I said, God, I don't know what to do anymore. I'm tired and I feel stuck creatively. I love politics. I love art. I love making work. I love the idea of investigating what it is to be Black in an Australian context, even though I'm not in Australia. And he said, Google politics, Google masters, Google arts. Put the 3 words together and see what comes up. And then came up 2 courses. The MA in Art and Politics at Goldsmiths in London and an MA in Arts Politics at NYU Tisch School of Arts. I asked a few trusted friends and said, where do you see me, London or New York? I thought they'd say London because I'm a theatre gal. They all said New York, shocked me. So I applied for NYU and got in to that course. And that's where my artistic practice really got shaped, grounded, and launched. As a poet, as a tableau vivant choreographer, as a writer, and as a thinker on the subject of Blackness as it manifests here in Australia through its creation in the United States. Through that, I did my very first tableau vivant show, which went really well. God just kept dropping these images in my head as I was on buses and trains, and I kept going, whoa, whoa, whoa. So I said to one of my lecturers, I've got this idea for a show. Can I put it together? She said, sure. There was a gallery down the road, the Kimmel Galleries, and they said, we'd love to have your work in our street front windows. And that's where my show See What I See, which has since been performed in Sydney as an immersive theatre show, and in Ghana at the Chalewote Street Art Festival, came to pass. Now, this was 2016, 2017. I also got the absolute honor of shadowing or observing through an observership program 2 of New York's best directors, Kent Gash and Laurie Woolery, at the Public Theatre and at the South Coast Repertory in California. And I guess through that time, I kept thinking, where do I take from this? What do I learn from this? How do I apply this? And I believe at the time I was convinced I needed to go back to Ghana and give just a bit more. So I did that for 4 years, 2017 to 2021. But once again, I completely expended myself. I gave way too much and it wasn't always necessarily welcome or needed. And I ended up being burnt out and burning a lot of bridges, which is a lesson that now 3 years later, I've really learned and will hold those lessons forever. So I arrived back in Australia in 2021, July, straight into Sydney, into New South Wales last lockdown. And that was a time where I was really dealt with. I had to address all of the pain and all of the trauma, all of the regret and the shame and the guilt for the many, many, many mistakes I'd made in my working life, but also the fact that I felt like I was a failure. A friend of mine who's a doctor spoke to me once, heard one thing I said and said, Effie, you've got PTSD. And I said, what? I've been studying and creating and choreographing. What in my life? And it all started to make sense as I told her my personal struggles. So for me, that was a turning point. I had to rethink my life, rethink who I was, rethink how I was approaching the idea of purpose, because I've always been in pursuit of purpose, and how to really find my way and carve my own path. And that's what I spent the last 3 years doing. During that time, a friend of mine said, send me your CV. I'm sending it to my agent. Her agent took me on that very day, and I was blessed with the opportunity to be asked to submit for a number of amazing films and theatre productions, one of which was the Tony Award-winning Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, the Australian cast of which is Australia's longest-lasting play. We ran until July of this year. And just before that, I was brought in by amazing women, Wanika Mshila, Henrietta Amevo, Bernadette Pham, Lila Enright, Niwa Ellie, who have been my rocks in starting my journey again here, and put me on the 7 Methods of Killing Kylie Jenner community engagement as the lead consultant. And since then, I have been forging forward, making way for other young artists and performers here of African descent in Australia.
Wow, what an incredible story. My goodness. You have packed into your young life so much and literally grabbed every opportunity as it comes. It's inspiring. It's really inspiring.
Thank you very much.
So, if you can reflect back to your formative years and go back and give the younger you 3 nuggets of wisdom based on what life has taught you up until this point, what would those 3 nuggets of wisdom be?
I think one is to trust my instinct, trust what God's given me in terms of instincts and intuition, discernment, to really trust that. The other thing I would tell her is that she really is capable and beautiful and needed in this world. And the third thing is, it's so hard to articulate this one. What God has given you is what you work with. You are just as anointed, as blessed, as purposed as anyone else in this world, and move with that fearlessly. I think if I'd learned that particular lesson earlier, I mean, I know I wouldn't be where I am today because this is all part of life, but I know I would have done things differently to perhaps not have felt like I'd failed at a time when really I hadn't. I just needed to stop.
Mm-hmm. So your work often revolves around the themes of Black culture and Black creatives. Can you share some insights into those concepts and what they mean to you and why they're important in today's society?
One thing that I think drives my practice, I shouldn't say I think, I know it drives my practice, is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's danger of the single story. The danger of a single story. When I heard that, read that, I had already been a fan of her work for years. Purple Hibiscus was her first novel I picked up at Blacktown Library. And I picked it up because I saw the name Ngozi. And I was like, this is a Nigerian name in the middle of Blacktown Library. What is it doing here? And so I was like, I don't care what it's about. I need to read it. And what I found was this story that was so far away from my experience, but yet so familiar in many ways. And that's when I really think it kicks this idea of like, as a African Ghanaian fancy girl in Western Sydney, what's defining or what's telling me who my identity or what my identity is? And so it's really through reading her work and listening to her TED Talk about that single story that I was like, yes, we need to control and we need to take take hold of proudly how the story of who and what we are is told. And part of that for me in Australia is going, what's American, what's European, what's West African, what's Southern African, what are the specifics in those in terms of our culture and our languages, what gets erased, what gets washed over, and how do we actually start saying, no, the specificity of our backgrounds is what grants us the universality. When we're speaking from the specifics, when I, as an Akan woman, speak about Adinkra symbols, I know I'm speaking about something that's not just a pretty piece, but something that's imbibed in our daily life and living. When Nigerian friends of mine use proverbs, or Tree-speaking friends use proverbs, I know that's something that's specific. And because they live in that specific specificity, how they communicate comes across as universal. So I'm really passionate about digging further. I don't know sometimes if African Australian is enough. Sometimes I think, well, we've got a privilege that our brothers and sisters who were in forced diaspora didn't have. And that is knowing our hometowns and the languages our mothers and grandmothers spoke. And so why would we wash that over when we can afford the specificity? And I believe from there, in challenging that story, people can find a sense of identity early in life that helps them to move forward in the West, forward when they go home with pride in who they are, as opposed to feeling like there's a book called Create Dangerously by Haitian writer Edwidge Danticat, and she speaks of a journalist who said the diaspora are people who have their feet firmly placed in two places. Now, a lot of us now are not firm because we're second, third generation. So we've got to know what it is. Okay, I'm Aussie in this way. I'm Ghanaian in that way, but I have knowledge of all these other cultures because of my Aussiness, and that's how I can plant myself firmly.
So as someone who explores the concept of Blackness and its intersections with identity and race, can you elaborate on how your experiences in Australia have influenced your perspective on these issues, especially as a Ghanaian artist in the diaspora?
Yeah, I think one of them is something I wrote about in the anthology that Maxine Beneba Clark put together, Growing Up African in Australia. And it was the day that I wore kaba and slit, which is, the top and skirt that Ghanaians wear traditionally, that was brought to us by the Dutch, similar to what the Dutch brought to Indonesia. And so I wore that. And at the time, I was 5. And this was at Pagewood Public School. And one of my teachers said, "Oh, which country are you from?" And, because we were all supposed to be parading across the stage. And I said Ghana. And then she said, that's South Africa, right? And in my head, I was like, I know it's not, but I couldn't remember my dad saying Ghana is in West Africa. So I kind of just said, yes. But inside I was like, this isn't right. So when I got to the stage, instead of saying this is Effie from wearing kaba and slit from Ghana, she said, this is Effie wearing a traditional South African dress. And I was like, but it's not but I was 5.
Oh, wow.
And I will never forget that. It's such a clear memory because I remember getting off the stage at 5 feeling like I'd let everyone down. And I was quite sad because it was too late to go back. And so I think that's one of the main things that really drives my need for specificity, because so everyone wants to be seen, right? Everyone wants to feel like, as we say nowadays, validated or seen or known. And you're not quite sure what's around you, you can't get to that place.
No,
so I want to make sure that no other child, and I mean, it sounds romantic to say that, but I want to make sure that as many kids as possible, as many adults as possible whose inner child hasn't been seen for that specificity, can find through my work like a moment where they can go, oh, now I'm going to go find out. Oh, yeah, I remember my parents talking about this. I do feel proud of where I was, but for so many years, because Australia lives in this space of, well, we're not racist, we're ignorant. So many Africans I see play into the ignorance because they don't want to do the work. And that's fine. Not everyone's called to do the work, but for those of us who are, I think our point is to be like, the work is important so that your kitty bubs will be able to say, I'm Aussie, but I know exactly where I'm coming from.
Yeah, it's crucial.
Yes.
So your installation series on race in diaspora, See What I See, has been performed in various cities. Can you share some key messages or takeaways you hope the audience receives from this series?
Oh, there are a lot, and I think I've touched on most of them through my other answers, but what I probably haven't, as I'm thinking through the question, is how important it is to do something that I learned from one of my professors. Her name is Marta Morena Vega. She's a Puerto Rican, Afro-Boricua or Afro-Puerto Rican lecturer, and she taught us how to triangulate, which is, looking at an object or a piece of art, which is how I take the process, an object, a piece of art, a song, a dance. And I go, okay, when did this happen? Or when was this created or painted? Or what time in history is this reflecting? And look at what else was happening in the world at the same time in order to make sense of it. And so I hear a few people, I've heard a few young people here in Australia of Afro descent say things like, oh, I think we should really stop talking about the slave trade. Like, it's not really relevant anymore. And I'm like, well, it is. It is. And it's important to know about the transatlantic slave trade. It's important to know about the Arab slave trade, because what that does is put into context what language is on the continent and why certain languages exist. What it does is show what cultures have impacted and made their way across into the Americas, the Caribbean, and Latin America, and parts of Europe, and why, and how all of those things then translate into the creation of race, Black versus white, and then, of course, the language of who's to be subjugated, who's to be arrested, who's to be profiled, who's to be at the bottom of the desirability politics and chain, and why, if you see a certain image of Black women, your stomach goes, or when you see people out in public wearing something, you're like, naturally, if you don't understand all the history behind it, it can only be a feeling. It can only be a feeling. It can't be coming from a place of knowledge and understanding to make sense of you now. Oh, why were baggy pants in fashion? If you didn't read about the slave trade, if you didn't read about what people had to wear, if you didn't read about how that came through into hip hop culture, you won't know why you're wearing what you're wearing. And so you're wearing it, but you're not even understanding where it's coming from. So most of my work is to say, it's not enough in diaspora in the West as a Black body to be ignorant about the histories. You should do your best to learn all of them.
Man, I could talk to you forever. All right, my last question for you is this. What advice would you give aspiring artists, writers, performers who are passionate about exploring the themes of identity, culture, and diversity in their work based on your journey and experiences in the field?
Yes. So there's something in Akan culture that has been used a lot lately. It comes up every so often in the arts world, and that is the symbol Sankofa. Sankofa is part of a proverb that I want to make sure I pronounce properly because my Aussie tongue and my Akan tongue are not the same. But se wu refri na wu Sankofa Yenchi. So it says if you've forgotten something and you turn to go and get it, it's not an abomination. There's no shame in saying, I don't know. So my biggest thing is use that thing, not so much as how people say it today, which is like, oh, just turn back and get it. It's like, no, there's more to it. It's the fact that there's nothing wrong with going back and asking, why did this happen? How did this happen? When did this happen? To whom and by whom and how? All those questions. So one of the easiest ways for me is to talk to my parents. But also, just if I don't feel comfortable doing that, which not all people or young people are, or some parents don't want to talk about the past, one thing I say is to go on Google and just pick something, wax print, the history of wax print, and start finding little things that interest you and going back through into history that way. That's one way that I do it. So deep reading in a sense. Listening to music that talks about these things. There are a lot of people, Blitz the Ambassador, who's just directed The Color Purple that comes out this December. People like Lauryn Hill. There are a lot of people who are woke, as we say, but wake up, go online, read what you're not being taught at school. What were African people doing in 1802, during World War I, during World War II? Things will come up. And these are your little ways of grabbing that to help you make your work, write your poetry, write your books, write your music. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I love your energy. I love the work you are doing in reminding all of us that where we are from is important, our history is important, and understanding that is what makes you a holistic human being on the planet. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm truly humbled. Thank you for having me today.
Man. And thank you to everybody who's tuned in today. The Diversity Connector is a platform that brings you people from diverse backgrounds, all walks of life, young and old, energetic like this young woman, sharing our stories so that we can bridge the gap of misunderstanding. It's through the sharing of stories that we share who we are. I believe that every single person is a door into another world. So tune in again tomorrow when I interview another amazing person. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world. And bye for now. Thanks again, Effie.
Thank you so much, Auntie Gertrude.
And that's a wrap, everybody, on today's episode of the Diversity Connector podcast. Thank you for tuning in and being part of our vibrant and global conversation. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and it's been an honor to share this space with you, where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a tapestry of diverse perspectives. Remember, every story you've heard today is a thread in the larger fabric of our shared humanity. So, as you step back into your world, carry these stories with you and let them inspire you to embrace and celebrate the rich diversity around us. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us share these inspiring stories with more listeners. Do follow us on social media by looking for the Diversity Connector podcast for more updates. Until then, keep connecting, keep listening, and keep celebrating the beauty of diversity. This is the Diversity Connector podcast signing off. Stay curious, stay open,